And you're very welcome along to Week 10. It's OTB NFL. We're going to speak with Sam Monson in a little while. Sue's picks crashed back to earth a bit like one of those high-powered offences that actually weren't as good as we all thought last week. She'll be on a little bit later on to defend herself. But first, though, we're going all the way to New York City, to Cian Fahey, who normally is in Cork at this time. Cian, we've got you out of bed very early, or else you're on a rollover from the night before?
9:30, but it's a bit of a weird lighting setup right now, so it looks like it's the middle of the night.
How are you doing? Holidays?
I'm doing all right.
Watching football in America, not as good as watching football in Ireland?
Yeah, well, you've got to watch with fans over here, and they like to give out, and the Giants right now aren't exactly having a good time. I was in a bar on Monday night, and the Giants punted the ball away at the end of their first drive, and as the ball was coming down, someone behind me shouted, "Oh my God, the returner's already gone for a touchdown," before he'd even caught the ball. So that tells you how the mindset of the Giants fans are right now.
Did they celebrate wildly at the end with their victory over the second worst team in football this year?
Yeah, well, it's one of these weird dynamics that you kind of only get in American sports, where half of the bar is celebrating like mad. They're all Giants fans, but half of them are celebrating like mad, and the other half wanted to lose the game for the draft pick. So it's a weird atmosphere. Yeah,
it's mad. I don't know yet if the quarterbacks in next year's draft are going to be good enough for anybody to willingly tank if the first pick is going to be somebody worth drafting. If Teddy Bridgewater or Joe Flacco might actually be the best quarterbacks on the market at the end of the season.
Well, this is always the case at this time of the year. We never know about the quarterbacks because we haven't gone through the draft process, and we haven't got the actual NFL scouts coming in and going through these games. You've got the college scouts. The teams are too focused on their own teams right now. The thing that concerns me with Dave Gettleman is he's probably that kind of guy who, and Dave Gettleman, the Giants general manager, he's probably the kind of guy who will prefer Joe Flacco over getting a younger quarterback and grooming him and building. And that's kind of what the Giants need. I don't think throwing Joe Flacco into that offense would change much for them. It'd just be a slightly better version of Eli, really.
Yeah. Let's talk about one of the big stories of the week. That's the Pittsburgh Steelers, who are now officially going to have to be without Le'Veon Bell. Still a bit of debate about whether or not he's going to be a completely unrestricted free agent at the end of the season. We can let the NFLPA, his agents and the owners try and work that one out. But does it make any difference for the Steelers' Super Bowl chances for the rest of the season?
Yeah, I think Bell being out is a big deal. I think it's been eased off a little bit because James Conner has been really, really, really good. He's dealing with his own injuries right now, or his injury issues right now. It won't be a long-term thing, but it might be a problem this week or the next week after. I think the Steelers aren't really a Super Bowl contender anyway. The three teams in the NFC, there's a couple of teams in the AFC who are better than them. And the game last week was kind of an anomaly. And it's an anomaly not just because Ben Roethlisberger has these games every year where he's dominant and brilliant and throws 5+ touchdowns. He did it twice in 2 weeks a couple of years ago, once against the Colts, one of the best games you'd ever see. It's not a sign of that he's turning a season around. It's a sign that Ben Roethlisberger has these peaks and they follow with incredible valleys. And that's a problem for the Steelers because you can't expect to go through a playoff run with a quarterback like that. The other part of this is, last week, their game over the Panthers, they scored 50 points, they dominated. Whatever way that game goes, whatever reason that happens, you can argue about. But short week Thursday night football games always favour the home team, and they do so excessively. We've had 9 games this year where there's been a short week with a quarterback, or a short week for a home quarterback on a Thursday night. And in those 9 games, the home team quarterback has thrown for a touchdown, or has thrown for at least 5 touchdowns 3 times. In all other games, 139 games this year, a quarterback has done that 3 times as well. So there's obviously something happening there where the defense doesn't get enough time to prepare and doesn't get enough time to sort itself out. Because you can't go from 33.3% of the time in those games to have quarterbacks throwing for at least 5 touchdowns and 1.01% of the time in all other games. So you can react to that Steelers game, you can kind of overreact to it, you can say the Panthers aren't as good as we think. My thought in that game is kind of the Panthers are fine, the Steelers are still what we expect them to be, inconsistent, but I wouldn't be talking about them as challengers in the AFC.
And yet they're kind of cresting into a period of form. Their defense has vastly improved from September form. Is there not enough about this Steelers team that will make them very dangerous, particularly because it looks like they might get a home game in the wildcard weekend?
I think so.
But wildcard weekend, but they'll be divisional champions. I'm sorry, that somebody will have to go there early in the playoffs.
I think so, but them getting better and them being a real contender with the AFC are two different things. The AFC is such that you can get into the wildcard round, you can get into the second round. Like the Titans last year went two rounds in the playoffs in the AFC, and they still fired their head coach because they recognised the team was too flawed to actually compete properly. This year they're a better team because of that. The problem for the Steelers is it does feel like the Chiefs are far, far, far better than them. No matter what goes on in that matchup, you would expect the Chiefs to win with relative ease. And you saw that earlier this year when they blew them out. And I know I just talked about how blowing a team out doesn't always mean something, but the way it happens matters. And the way it happened with them, it was way too easy for Patrick Mahomes in that offense. Then you look at the Chargers. Like the Chargers, I know I've told you all year, don't trust the Chargers, don't trust the Chargers, don't trust the Chargers. But we're at a point now where the Chargers have played so well for so long that we kind of have to talk about them. And they look like the second best team in the AFC. The Patriots are faltering, but the Patriots have always had a good time against the Steelers and have always managed to go against the Steelers, and especially Mike Tomlin's Steelers with Brady, even though Brady has struggled the last month. So it's just very hard to be all that excited about this team.
Yeah, at the same time, it just feels, on the Chargers, if Joey Bosa plays any football this year and is as good as he has been when he's been fit, then their team is a live, real threat to almost anybody in a one-off game. And really, when we get to the playoffs, we're just talking about a series of one-off games without kind of putting the three teams who are on that one pedestal, the Saints, Kansas City and the Rams on their own pedestal. But everybody else in a one-off game, I don't know, the Steelers look like they're pretty dangerous over the last 5 weeks. Maybe they've got another month or so to show it, but
I think that Joey Bosa point is a really good one because he obviously hasn't played much this year. But it's also going to be important that they get him back because Denzel Perryman just went down as well. So their defensive front seven there, it's taking some hits, and obviously the secondary had already taken some hits with Jason Verrett being gone. So they do need Bosa back at some point. But the Chargers, I think the beauty of the Chargers really has been their offense, where Melvin Gordon's been fantastic and the play calling there has worked really well, and Rivers is still Phillip Rivers, obviously.
Well, let's stay in the AFC. You mentioned the Titans and how having a new coach come in and try and do some different things is something that has taken a little bit of a while to get going this year. In particular, there were, at the end of September, early October, there were significant doubts about whether or not they were actually getting any better. The last couple of weeks have seen a significant improvement from their quarterback and from their defence.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, like all the talk earlier in the year was about Mariota's hand and how he couldn't feel and he couldn't actually close his hand around the football, and that's why you got some Blaine Gabbert games, and then Gabbert obviously got hurt himself and Mariota had to come back in. Over the past couple of weeks, the past 2 games of the season, I know it's only 2 games, it's a very small sample, but there's no quarterback who's played better than him over the past 2 weeks. That game, we didn't have a show last week, but if we had, we would have spent most of it talking about that Monday Night Football game because they put him in third and long over and over and over and over again, and he kept converting. And it was like, when you're put as a quarterback, you're putting a 3rd and 8 or longer, the defense can do whatever it wants to you, and you've always got to throw into small windows, and you've always got to throw a function under pressure. And he did it over and over again, and they managed to win that game because of that. You come to this week against the Patriots, Tom Brady's obviously not playing well, the offense isn't playing well, and it should be playing a lot better. And if it did, they'd probably have been able to exploit that Titans defense because it's not a great defense. But on Mariota's side of the ball, you've only really got one wide receiver. You've got Corey Davis. Normally, that means Bill Belichick is going to take away your number 1 wide receiver, going to force you to do things you don't want to do. But the Titans, through a combination of Mariota playing really well and Matt LaFleur, who's a coach off the Sean McVay coaching tree, he was with him in Los Angeles before he came over this year, and him scheming, moving Corey Davis around to get him into preferable matchups, they were able to move the ball and sustain offense. One of the Corey Davis's touchdown early in that game came against Stephon Gilmore when he lined up on the right side of the offense, motioned into the slot on the left side. He was on the interior slot, so that means there was 2 guys outside of him. That means he had a huge amount of space on the outside. When he motioned, Stephon Gilmore followed him across the field, so they knew it was man coverage rather than zone coverage, and Mariota was able to find Davis down the left sideline after a double move route because they had wide open space and because he knew what the coverage was going to be. That's the kind of thing they did not have in their offense last year because they didn't use any motion. They didn't use wide spread out formations. They had the quarterback under center, so he couldn't really see what was happening in the secondary. So it's a big, big change. And so far, well, maybe not so far, but over recent weeks, they've turned the corner a little bit. So far for the season as a whole, they've been inconsistent. Maybe that's about Mariota's health. Maybe that's about just who they are as a team. We'll find out over the next couple of weeks. Yeah,
especially this game, because the Colts are starting to turn into a team that looks like a real team. They've got a quarterback who isn't quite back to the level that he was at when he was absolutely sensational, but who we now can have some faith in the fact that he might get there. Their offensive line has been much improved. They've got some talent on both sides of the ball in a way they haven't had in recent years. So that's going to be an interesting game this weekend. The Titans 5-4 at the Colts 4-5. Let's talk about the Browns and Baker Mayfield feeling dangerous. Was he dangerous? And how dangerous is he going to be?
Well, I think you look at those numbers and you have to say he was dangerous. You can't really say much against him based on the production he had in that game. this performance to me was fascinating because it kind of brought in the idea of quarterback development and what your philosophy is. And I'm not saying this in the sense of one being right and one being wrong, but Hugh Jackson ran an offense that was extremely stressful for the quarterback, and it was extremely bad for the offense as a whole. It didn't get Duke Johnson in space. It didn't set up receivers for yards after the catch or to get open more easily, and it put a lot of stress on the offensive tackles, guys who can't pass block. Freddie Kitchens is a new offensive coordinator. He's working under Greg Williams. He did the exact opposite. He had this quick passing game, this misdirection game. The ball was coming out of Mayfield's hands as much as possible. When he went under center, he was doing play action. When he was throwing screens outside, Nick Chubb became the focal point of the offense. And obviously that worked so much better than what Hugh Jackson was doing. That's the short term, though. What we need to understand here for the Browns is the long term matters more than the short term. And for the long term, is it better for Baker Mayfield to be in this offense where he's not asked to do a whole lot, against being in an offense that's a bit more open, an offense that asks him to hold onto the ball, asks him to throw to different route combinations, to work different areas of the field to help him grow. Obviously, you make more mistakes in that second type of offense, but over the long term, that might be better for you because you can learn from your mistakes rather than just being in an offense that doesn't ask you to do too much. It's very hard to say one is better than the other because you have examples of guys who are in the safe offenses who gradually get better just as they get older, and then you have guys in the other offenses like Andrew Luck who gets thrown in, throws 20 interceptions, learns from all those mistakes, comes back the next year and is a completely different quarterback because of the mistakes he made. So there is no right answer. It's just a fascinating thing to look at and understand how this is going to develop and why coaching is so difficult because there is no clear blueprint.
Except one is far more high risk than the other. If you're in the low risk offense at the start, you at least get some confidence from wins. You don't get slaughtered for a bunch of interceptions, which may or may not be your fault. So it's maybe 50-50 balls thrown to jump ball receivers. So, like, if you're the two quarterbacks who are the rookie 1 and 2 this year, would you prefer to be Sam Darnold, who is in a team that seems to have quit on their coach and has no discernible style, or would you prefer to be Baker Mayfield under the new coaching regime, who are like, look, we're going to get this thing moving. We've got a bunch of talented players here. We're going to get the ball to them, and we're going to try and win some games and get you confidence and get you kind of over the next couple of years to be somebody who has a winning record.
Well, I know what you'd prefer to be in the moment, but you have to go back. Let's take Dak Prescott and Carson Wentz from a couple of years ago. In the first season, Dak Prescott had a much better situation. He didn't have to do as much. He obviously had a relatively tough offense because they threw the ball at the intermediate level of the field a lot, but they were so talented, it didn't really matter what they did, and Prescott's job was pretty much easy all the time. Carson Wentz during his rookie year struggled massively and was asked to do an awful lot. You come to their second years, Prescott struggles a little bit more because the offense has dropped off a little bit around him, whereas Carson Wentz, he has a close to an MVP year. I'm talking more production than performance right now, but it's the difficulty of taking specific instances and the difficulty of taking specific thought processes and applying it to this. I kind of tend to agree with you in the sense that you want to give your young quarterback confidence. So if you want to start him off with very little on his plate and then gradually increase it, that kind of sounds like the perfect way. But hey, look, like I said, there is no blueprint.
Let's talk a little bit about the Bears and the strides that they've made. Obviously, the gif of Khalil Mack doing Khalil Mack things has gone completely mental on the internet. I think 21 million views was the last time I had a look and saw it. But so that's one part of the story. Obviously, their defense has been very, very good all year. But the real story here is actually the development of the quarterback that they got slaughtered for taking last year, right? Like we're beginning to see him be a proper threat and somebody who they're beginning to ask a bit more of. And now somebody that Mitchell Trubisky's not striking fear in opposition defensive coordinators just yet, but he's a real player.
In that offense, he's striking fear in a lot of coordinators. He's had rough patches. He's had major struggles he didn't have last year. He's gotten lucky that those mistakes haven't been punished to the fullest extent, because if they had, you'd be talking about games where he's had 3 and 4 interceptions and completely derailed the games that they would have otherwise won. The fascinating thing for me is all of his issues this year have been mechanical. He didn't have any of these issues last year. But you put him in this new offense, you have him with his quarterback's coach, and his footwork has been a mess. He's been throwing the ball while falling backwards, throwing the ball while jumping in the air, throwing the ball while turning the wrong direction. And it's been a kind of frustrating thing because he's had receivers wide open. You go back to last week's game, and even the game prior to that, those issues have gone away very slowly. They're disappearing a little bit. So that's a very comforting thing, because his accuracy when he throws the ball with his mechanic set is really, really, really good. It's kind of unparalleled, really, because he can make throws that other quarterbacks simply don't make. And that was the selling point on him coming out of college. he had this innate accuracy and this unbelievable arm talent to take advantage of that accuracy. He made a couple of those throws to Allen Robinson this past week, one down the seam, one down the sideline for a touchdown, that most quarterbacks don't even try to attempt because they know they can't make those throws. But this week, the thing that really, really stood out from the quarterback's point of view, Trubisky was suddenly starting to do a lot of audibles. He's not done this. This came out of nowhere. He was making full-blown audible calls that you can see where he's setting the offense up, calling everything to a halt, talking to his receivers, talking to his offensive line, talking to his running back, changing a play, making hand signals, completely setting everything up for success. And they had 4 or 5 huge plays come from him audibly. If he's doing this now as well as he's got his mechanics fixed, this suddenly becomes an offense that's as terrifying as any other. This suddenly becomes an offense that's got a quarterback who's playing at a level that he wasn't playing at previously. And then you add in, Allen Robinson just came back from being sidelined for a while. Allen Robinson entered this year off a torn ACL, so he'd been slower. He was not playing with the same level of athleticism. And to the point of 3 weeks ago, before he actually took 2 weeks off and sat down, he was kind of, I wouldn't call him a net negative, but it wasn't the positive you expected from him. You weren't getting the big plays. On this weekend, you saw everything from Allen Robinson. You saw him be pressed off the line of scrimmage from the slot, catch the ball, have a huge play and yak down the field. I think he get 22, 23 yards after the catch, making multiple defenders miss. Not something he had done to that point. You saw him work the seam and catch the ball at full extension before taking a big hit. You saw him get open down the sideline. Trubisky threw not a great ball to him, so he had to reach back and adjust to it, and he made that comfortable adjustment too. That's what they signed up for when they brought him back, or when they brought him in free agency. So right now, you've got this offense that's taking a taking a turn in the right direction, taking steps to go in the right place. And like you were talking about with the Steelers, and because I buy into them a little bit more because of their overall level of talent, like you talked about with the Steelers, they're kind of starting to peak at the right time.
Yeah, so not quite willing to make them contenders just yet for the whole thing, but certainly an unbelievably dangerous playoff team.
Oh, yeah. I think the thing is they're probably going to reach a point during the playoffs where the other more experienced teams, the guys with more established quarterbacks, are going to have fewer mistakes in the smaller samples of those games. Like if you take the Bears and you go and play the Saints and you're playing, well, you might be playing a home game, probably not. You probably have to play in New Orleans. If you take Mitch Trubisky and the Bears into New Orleans, yeah, you'll probably give them a good game. But do you expect Mitch Trubisky and that offense to make fewer mistakes than Drew Brees and his offense? I don't. If you go to the Chiefs, they're probably going to have more a kind of a better version of what you're trying to build, a more established version of what you're trying to build. So they're going to largely be a better team. Although defensively, the Bears have more, especially with Khalil Mack. So that might help even it out a little bit. Even if they play a team like the Eagles, who might not make the playoffs, even you would kind of still look at the Eagles and think they've more experience, they've more established players, they kind of know what to do in different situations. So it's a tough one to be fully enveloped in them as a playoff team or as a Super Bowl team this year, but they're not looking at this year. They're set up for the short term, the long term. They got Khalil Mack. They know he's young enough to continue to build their defense around. They know that Trubisky's young enough to continue to build their offense around. They're in a really, really good position despite not having first round picks for the next couple of years.
Well, I was going to ask, so the big kind of the elephant in the room here is that no first round picks for the next 2 years, but by performing really well this season and by reaching the playoffs, there's a good chance that's like a bottom 10 pick, maybe a bottom 8 pick, maybe a bottom 7, 6 pick, whatever. However, which is suddenly not that valuable a pick for the Raiders to have Khalil Mack on your team. So next year it'll be interesting to see what happens after that. They still have Mr. Trubisky on their rookie contract, so the massive amount of money they're paying for this game wrecker in Khalil Mack is counterbalanced by the fact that they have another 3 seasons of Trubisky on if they wanted, if they don't want to pay him up early. So it's not a bad situation they find themselves in.
Yeah, and everyone wants to focus on the draft all the time. And the first part of this is, yeah, you give up a first-round pick. But it's only a first-round pick in each of those drafts. You can still find players, you can still find complementary players, supplemental players in the later rounds, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, or 7th rounds. You can even find guys who aren't drafted. You've got... and then you can go to free agency and you can sign second-level free agents. You don't have to compete for the top-level guys because you've got your quarterback, you've got your pass rusher, you've got your number 1 wide receiver, you've got your number 1 tight end. You need some offensive linemen. That's pretty much what the Bears need. That's kind of their one glaring issue. So you're not going to solve that with 1 first-round pick. You're not going to solve that with 2 first-round picks. You can try and solve that with 10 other different ways, but you can focus on your specific weaknesses because you've got established players, established talent at specific players, at specific positions.
Yeah, they're playing the Vikings this weekend. Obviously, it's a divisional game. It's the Vikings at Chicago. The Vikings kind of need to get a win at 5-3. They'll be 2 games back from the Bears, 2.5 games back actually from the Bears if they lose this, and I don't know if I can see them making up that gap.
It's going to be extremely difficult for them to get that win, though, because, like, what does Khalil Mack specialise in doing? You talked about it earlier. You saw him run over an offensive lineman and get to the quarterback. That happens a lot with the Vikings, and when a defensive end gets to a quarterback with Kirk Cousins, that generally means the ball's going to be fumbled. So it's just kind of a recipe for disaster there. You have a matchup up front where Leonard Floyd, Akeem Hicks, Khalil Mack, they're going to be living in the backfield, and Cousins isn't the type of quarterback who's going to alleviate pressure and mitigate pressure and work around and get the ball to Diggs and Thielen and make that work in bad situations. Defensively, the Vikings also struggled a lot with play action, a lot with misdirection, stuff you saw when the Bills and the Rams exploited them earlier this year. They've been better since then, but this offense is going to be very good at moving them laterally, moving them horizontally to set up vertical shots, and I think it's going to be a major mismatch problem for the Vikings, and I would be surprised if they can even compete in that game.
Okay, so I don't actually know what the spread is, but you're saying the Bears are going to cover it anyway. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
The Philadelphia Eagles at the New Orleans Saints is the last thing I wanted to talk to you about. So the Eagles are 4-5. The Saints are 8-1. You've been pretty impressed. I mean, everybody's been impressed with how the Saints' offense has been performing. But this is amazing. They're brilliant to watch.
It's kind of crazy to think. Remember after week 1 and Ryan Fitzpatrick cut them up, and we were looking at them going, "Are they going to be this year's big disappointment?" And they've steadied the ship and they've sorted themselves out. The interesting aspect of the Saints to me is if you go back through the Drew Brees and Sean Payton era in New Orleans, you've had these teams that have had Drew Brees as a star, and then you've had Pierre Thomas, you've had, you've had Marquise Colson, you've had Lance Moore, you've had Jimmy Graham, but Jimmy Graham wasn't really known at the time. You've had all these guys who are just kind of role players, guys who you could plug in and take out and replace easily if they were gone, and that's not what their offense is anymore. Now they've got top level, top heavy talent. You've got Michael Thomas there, who is very clearly one of the best wide receivers in football. You've got Alvin Kamara, who might be the best running back in football outside of Todd Gurley, obviously, because Todd Gurley is Todd Gurley. And you've got Mark Ingram there, who's a phenomenal running back too. So you've got Drew Brees with that kind of trio of high quality players, and then Sean Payton putting them in positions to completely stress the opposing defense's greatest weaknesses. It's a different style of offense, but it's just as effective, and it's kind of alleviating the pressure on Drew Brees to make difficult throws because he's set up in nice positions all the time. In this Bengals game last week where they scored 51 points, they did so by attacking the middle of the field and attacking the linebackers over and over and over again. And they did that in different ways, but they were able to, it was mostly concentrated through Alvin Kamara working out of the backfield and option routes, working in space against obviously slower players, getting Michael Thomas working in crossing routes after play action so he gets isolated with linebackers and safeties, and putting Mark Ingram out in space like on that screen where he ran in a big touchdown. So this offense, it's not like it used to be. It's not like where Drew Brees drops back and he can have 5 receivers who are all similar level and he'll find them. You know what this offense is going to do. They're going to show to Michael Thomas when you overplay the inside. They're going to run the ball or pass to Alvin Kamara and Mark Ingram when you overplay the outside. And it's very, very clear. It's a very specific game plan. It's not as exciting or as kind of diverse as the Chiefs or the Rams, but it works just as well, and that's why this offense and this team is right there with the Rams and the Chiefs, even though we kind of focus on the Rams and the Chiefs more.
Yeah, obviously they're a game back where they played a one game fewer. Like, they weren't until the Rams game really spoken about that much as potential Super Bowl champions. But at this point now, everybody's starting to go, oh, it's interesting that Drew Brees has never won the MVP, and clearly he deserves one at this stage of his career, you know, even if it's like one of those kind of Paul Scholes awards, which he gets for being Paul Scholes. And yet it would be totally justified. Like, he deserves to be in the conversation.
I think he deserves to be in the conversation. I also think Patrick Mahomes is very clearly the MVP this year. The thing about it is I won't complain if Drew Brees wins, because Drew Brees has been robbed in the past. He deserves credit for it, for I guess it's a Lifetime Achievement Award, I guess. But he deserves credit for being... Well, the thing about it is he's in a role in that offense that isn't the toughest. But he's mastering that role. He's thrown 1 interception all year. 1 interception in 9 games is ridiculous. Even by today's standards, where people don't throw interceptions that much and we have huge yardage numbers and we have huge touchdown numbers, 1 interception in half of your games, over half of your games, is just ludicrous. And it's not like he's out here relying on defenders dropping passes for him. He's just not throwing the ball into places that are dangerous. He's holding it and keeping defenders held with his eyes. He's moving them with with ball placement. He doesn't have to throw into tight windows because of the offense he's set up in, but when he does throw into tight windows, he does it expertly. So I will have no complaints if Drew Brees wins the MVP. I just think it's kind of very clearly Patrick Mahomes' award.
There's a thing briefly that links the Saints and the Bears, and that's just how weird the NFL is. When you think back to when they trade away Jimmy Graham, and when there's some fairly serious conversation about the fact that Sean Payton might be leaving, that he was on the block if the Niners were linked with him, maybe for a couple of first-round picks, that his time at the Saints was completely over. And then he doubles down and decides he's going to stay, and Breeze decides he's going to stay as well. And here they are, suddenly Super Bowl contenders again. And you look at how that team was a joke when Rob Ryan was their defensive coordinator. And it's the same with the Bears, how crap the Bears were like 2.5 seasons ago. They were an absolute joke. A few trades, land on the quarterback, and hey-ho, all of a sudden the whole city of Chicago is aflame, thinking that the glory days are back.
Well, the interesting thing with the Saints is they were so aggressive in trying to rebuild in 1 year. They made so many mistakes. They had all these trades during the draft. They had all these investments, and they were kind of trying to expand or extend Drew Brees' window or maximize it rather than extend it. And it was never working. They kept making these mistakes over and over again. They had these awful defenses, and Drew Brees had to carry the offense. And they've kind of reached a point now where they've managed to rebuild perfectly. And I know it's kind of very late in Drew Brees' career because he's at 40 or 41 or whatever it is, but they've done it just in time. So they are in a position now where they're set up next or perfectly for their next quarterback, whether that's Teddy Bridgewater or whether that's someone else. The Bears, I think the biggest thing for the Bears has been finding the right coach. I know Matt Nagy still kind of frustrates me in the way he calls plays in situational football, the conservatism he's had in attempts to win games at the end, like that Packers game still comes to mind, it still lingers over him. But the scheme they've put in, the way the offense is structured, the approach they have in building their defense, yeah, it's all kind of mirrors what the Saints have done, and hopefully, for them at least, hopefully it will work the same way.
Cian, enjoy the States. We'll talk to you again real soon. Take care.
Thanks, man. See ya.
It's Cian Fahey joining us every week here on the NFL podcast here on OTB. I'll run you through the weekend's fixtures now before we get to Sam Monson, so we can have a look at these. There are some pretty good fixtures this week, and we're going to finish our chat with Sam. We might start our chat with Sam about the fixture on Monday night, which was, of course, due to be in the Aztec Stadium, Estadio Azteca in Mexico City, but it isn't. So we can stick those fixtures back up there. Chiefs and Rams is now Monday Night Football. It's back in LA. Thursday Night Football, which may be over by the time you're listening to this, is the Packers at the Seahawks, which on paper looks like it's going to be a pretty good game between two fairly decent quarterbacks at the moment who are both in reasonable form. The Bengals at the Ravens, not exactly a classic, not the type of game that we hoped it might be earlier on in the season. Both teams looked like they were going to be decent. Obviously, the Bengals have Hugh Jackson back in the building this weekend, so that's going to be pretty interesting to see what happens. The Cowboys at the Falcons, that's going to be very interesting because it looks like the Falcons season might well be over, and the Cowboys are back in it after their 27-20 win against the Eagles last week. The Bucs at the Giants, well, two bad teams but plenty of points. The Steelers at the Jags. The Steelers owe the Jags a big punch in the mouth. The Texans at the Redskins. The Titans at the Colts. The Panthers at the Lions are the early Sunday kickoffs, so they're all at 6 o'clock Irish time on Sunday. Then the 9 o'clock games are the Broncos at the Chargers, the Raiders at the Cardinals, and the Eagles at the Saints, which should be an absolute cracker. That one's kicking off 9:25. And then the late game, which means you'll be bleary-eyed and a bit annoyed on Monday morning if you come to work after it, is the Vikings at the Bears. But Monday Night Football, which will take you into Tuesday morning our time, is the Chiefs at the Rams. Sam is with us. Sam Monson, good morning to you, wherever you are in the world. How are you?
Morning, Jer. How's it going? I'm good.
We may as well start with the best game. The highest points total that Vegas has ever set for an over is on Monday Night Football. The game is now going to be back in LA after the situation with Mexico. I guess none of that really matters. This is going to be one of the best games. I mean, can we hype it up too much? Is this one of the situations where we get too excited about something and then it falls on a damn squib?
I mean, there's a danger of that, obviously, but I don't see any reason that should happen. You know, we're talking about two of the most potent offenses in the NFL, two of the best schemes in the NFL, which always helps. So you're not 100% reliant on just athletic talent, which, you know, sometimes has a bad day or doesn't show up. The scheme itself is generating a huge amount of this offense. And then neither one of these defenses is great. They're both okay, and they both got talent to be better, I think, than they have been so far. But this should be a shootout. You're talking about two great quarterbacks, two great running backs, two pretty good offensive lines. The Rams, I think, have the best offensive line in the game. The Chiefs have been pretty good. And then the schemes are great. So this should be a shootout. I would say it's a Super Bowl preview, but I think the Rams in particular have got a lot of work to do just to get past the Saints, as we saw when those two faced each other. So it may still be a Super Bowl preview, but that's not set in stone yet.
Yeah, there's a little bit of the hype around the Rams has come off ever since that defeat to the Saints. And I'm not sure if that's entirely fair. Like, over the course of the regular season, we've seen it has never happened since the Miami Dolphins managed to go undefeated, and they didn't even have a full 16-game regular season. So, it's almost impossible. And do we overreact sometimes to narrow things like that? Like, all of a sudden I'm hearing people go, oh, the Rams defense isn't that good at all, actually. And despite the fact they've got some star names on it, well, they can be got at. They still do have Aaron Donald on their defense.
Yeah, they do. I think the defense isn't as good as it looked on paper heading into the season. Part of that is injuries. Obviously, losing a guy like Aqib Talib, a cornerback, that's a major loss for them. Marcus Peters, the other star-named cornerback that they brought in this season, has been little short of disastrous this year. He's given up a ton of touchdowns, a ton of big plays, hasn't made the big plays on the other end that he always made in his Chiefs career to offset the big plays that he always did allow. So their secondary in particular has given up a lot. I don't think you could overreact to it too much and say they're in trouble. I don't think you say that, but I think what we're saying is that the Saints are very much in this conversation as well. Before it was the Rams are going to the Super Bowl, they're the best team in football. That's all we need to think about. Now it's, okay, the Saints are a serious competitor, and the Rams are going to need to get past them. And in particular, home field advantage in the NFC, I think, becomes really critical, because as much as the Saints have won some big games on the road, they are much better in a dome. They're much better at home, where they don't have to go outside. And the Rams, if they have to go to New Orleans, that becomes a really difficult game for them. It's not one they can't win, but that becomes a Super Bowl before the Super Bowl.
Yeah. As a result, the Rams really need to win every single game for the rest of the season. I mean, okay, that's kind of given the Saints a bunch of wins, but you can see the form they're in, the momentum they have, the style of play they have, the depth that they have at the moment, that it looks like they are probably going to roll through most of the rest of the season. So all of a sudden this game becomes massively important.
Yeah, it really does. And they've started to suffer some of these injuries. We talked about Aqib Talib on the defense, but now Cooper Kupp goes down last week, their wide receiver, a non-contact injury. One of these you knew right away watching it, that's an ACL gone. Anytime a guy just crumples to the floor in the middle of his running his route, it's almost always a torn ACL. It's just what happens. Something in his knee buckled and he was down. And it's not necessarily that Cooper Kupp is one of the top wide receivers in the game. I don't think he's quite that good, but it's what that forces you to go to now in your depth. You've got to turn to a guy like Josh Reynolds, who has flashed the ability to make some plays, but he's clearly not the player Cooper Kupp is, who could be lined up all over that Rams offense, who can make plays from the slot, from out wide. And it's going to challenge their depth and their offense going down the stretch. So much of teams ending up in the Super Bowl is down to how lucky they get when it comes to injuries. Which guys did they lose over the course of the season? How good was the depth that patched up the loss of those players? And, so far, the Saints have been pretty injury-free. They've been relatively lucky when it comes to injuries. The Rams now, though, are starting to lose a few guys.
Yeah, so Talib was out for, he went on IR, so it was minimum 8 weeks. Just last week, Sean McVay was saying that it actually could be after week 13 before he ends up coming back. But if he's back for the last week of December, last 2 weeks of December into the playoffs, and he's anywhere near fully fit at that point, then there is a possibility that he transforms their defense, because it's that split second of coverage that the good cornerbacks give the defensive line to get at the opposition quarterback that changes games, right?
Absolutely. I mean, he is a corner. He's one of the few cornerbacks in the NFL that has the ability to go one-on-one with a wide receiver over the course of the game and effectively take him out of the game. Today's NFL, it's harder than ever to achieve that. The idea of these shut-down cornerbacks, guys like Deion Sanders or even Darrelle Revis, they're probably gone at this point. I don't think anybody is going to go a full season and just eliminate their man. It's too hard to play cornerback these days. But, Aqib Talib has had stretches where he allowed like 175 yards over an entire season. There are cornerbacks that have given that up in a single game, and Talib's been able to do that over a year. So him coming back late in the season could be a really huge boost for this Rams defense, because he does give you the ability to go one-on-one with a guy like Michael Thomas, say, for the New Orleans Saints. Or, I don't want to say he can go one-on-one with Tyreek Hill and the Kansas City Chiefs, because I don't know that anybody can do that, but he changes the game because he gives you a guy capable of going up against a number one receiver and at least limiting the impact they can have.
Yeah, he has the wiliness as well that might come into impact or have an impact if you're coming up against somebody like Tyreek Hill that a lot of people don't seem to be able to bring to bear. What do you expect to happen in this game then?
An absolute shootout. I mean, I can't see either of these defenses dramatically slowing down the opposition. I think if you ever watch arena football, it's offense and there's basically no defense. It's all scoring all the time, and the games are always sort of 75-82, and it basically comes down to the number of possessions you get on offense. If you can force the opposition to screw up one of their drives, or if you can get a turnover somewhere along the line, you just steal a possession that gets you that 7 points ahead. That's kind of what this game reminds me of, is that it's going to come down to which defense plays well, but which defense can essentially force one of these drives to stall. If you can put together 3 plays and just force them to punt, or if you can get a turnover somewhere and just get yourself an extra possession on offense, I think that's how you're going to win a game like this. But otherwise, I just can't see these defenses slowing down the offenses.
Jared Goff isn't really in the conversation that most people are having for MVP. Patrick Mahomes is, we were chatting with Keane about this, he's like his number one ahead of Drew Brees. But does Jared Goff just not get any credit because Sean McVay is such a genius? And is that a little bit unfair on him?
Yeah, it absolutely is. It's Sean McVay, and I think it's Todd Gurley as well. But we've seen in the past that Todd Gurley is not what drives this offense. When the offensive line was bad and Jared Goff wasn't playing well, Todd Gurley didn't play well at all. He was struggling, and he started to look a little bit like Trent Richardson. He was running down blind alleys. He wasn't taking the holes that were there. He looked bad. But then as soon as the offensive line is opening up these giant holes at the line of scrimmage, Todd Gurley looks like an MVP candidate, and everybody's saying, well, he's got 19 touchdowns. He's the MVP. But Jared Goff is making a far bigger impact to this offense than Todd Gurley is. He is taking these schemed plays, these schemed throws that Sean McVay is creating, and he's adding on top of that with these incredible pinpoint throws deep down the field. He's gotten a huge number of big-time throws that we call PFF's highest graded throws over the season. He's made a ton of these passes that most quarterbacks would not be able to make, even if the offense is scheming up these good looks. You still have to put the ball into a tight window, and that's what Jared Goff has been able to do. I think when you introduce the value element to this award, though, people can just too readily see other places on the Rams to sort of give that value credit to. Sean McVay is adding value. Todd Gurley is adding value. So inherently, Jared Goff can't take all of the credit on himself. Whereas with the Saints, even though those things are there as well, it's too easy to just say, well, Drew Brees is the guy where all the value is. Yeah. And Patrick Mahomes is the guy where all the value is.
I mean, and yet they do have a lot of weapons. Thomas and Kamara definitely right there for the conversation for the best running back wide receiver combination in football, and the stats that they're putting up this year are historically high. I did want to ask you about Aaron Donald, just in terms of the impact that he's having and how he is still cresting as a player into the absolute peak of his own career, let alone kind of a historical peak.
Yeah, it is. I mean, he's the best player in football, period. So he is better than anybody else compared with his peers. He is so far ahead of any other interior defender. It's not even funny. And he's getting better. I mean, this season is a career high for him in terms of PFF grade. He's generating pressure at a higher rate than he's ever done before. And last season, he led the league in pressure by a distance. He had 91 of them over a 14-game season because he didn't play in the first game and he didn't play in the last game. And this season, he's getting pressure at a higher rate. So Donald is basically, people talk about unblockable defenders all the time, and most players are not unblockable. They're going to have a lot of plays where they beat their blocks. But I would say that Donald is basically unblockable. The only determining factor about whether he's getting pressure or not is how quickly the ball is coming out, or if you're doing something else in terms of trick plays to get it away from him. But if you leave him one-on-one with an offensive lineman, and it doesn't matter who that offensive lineman is, he is going to beat him. It's just a case of how long it takes.
Yeah, okay. we'll keep an eye out for that this weekend to see if he can get to Patrick Mahomes. Two final quick things that I wanted to ask you about. Obviously, the San Francisco 49ers beaten on Monday night by a stunning performance from Eli Manning and Odell Beckham Jr. But Nick Mullens, what's the story of Nick Mullens? How are his stats after 2 games? Because obviously he had like a historically good debut against the worst team maybe in the history of football, the Raiders. But how did he get on this week?
Nick Mullens is a really interesting player. There seemed to be this dismissive attitude about, people were upset that they were forced to sit through watching Nick Mullens, who nobody had heard of before he made his debut against the Raiders. But, PFF graded him in college, and he came from a relatively small school, Southern Miss, Brett Favre's alma mater. And his grading in college was good. He had a one season with a PFF grade in the 90s, another one with a grade in the 80s. And then preseason, it's obviously not the real thing. But again, if you put your hand up in preseason, you're playing really well. If nothing else, it's another kind of indicative factor. Okay, we've seen something from this guy. Maybe it can translate to the regular season. So we've now seen impressive PFF grades in college, impressive PFF grades in preseason, and through 2 games, Nick Mullens has looked pretty good in the regular season. So I don't know that he has the ceiling of, a top quarterback, but at the very least, this guy has shown himself to be well worth a spot on a roster and an intriguing player within one of the best offensive schemes in the NFL. Kyle Shanahan's scheme is right up there with Sean McVay's, with Andy Reid's, and Sean Payton's in New Orleans. He knows how to get quality play out of quarterbacks. And, for him to get basically the remainder of this season with Jimmy Garoppolo down, to see how he plays, the 49ers could have found themselves either a top quality backup or a potential guy to sort of trade and flip for picks down the line to a quarterback needy team.
Yeah, so because he looks really good. When you see CJ Beathard out there, you're kind of going, oh, what's going to happen here? But when Nick Mullens is out there, granted through 2 games, you're kind of going, I want to see what this kid's going to do.
Right, and we're not saying that he is the next great quarterback prospect, but at the very least, at this point, he's earned the right of being respected as a viable quarterback. He's looked pretty good in college preseason and the regular season so far. So, let's not dismiss this idea that, we've got to sit through a Nick Mullens game. He's a pretty intriguing young quarterback and worth watching. Yeah.
One last thing. I'm sure you don't spend too much time in the horror show that is the subsection of San Francisco 49ers Twitterati, but there are some people suggesting that Kyle Shanahan should be on the hot seat, which is kind of ludicrous. There is a proper debate happening between the 49ers football fans who watch the games and go to them about whether or not their defensive scheme and defensive coordinator Robert Saleh is any good. And I can't tell. I don't know enough, but I know they keep losing these games where they have leads in the fourth quarter by a single score. It's not a great look.
Yeah, kind of ludicrous, I think, is probably putting it a little too kindly. The idea of Shanahan being on the hot seat is completely ridiculous. I think the defense, the scheme is not bad, but the talent is just not where it needs to be yet. All their best players are essentially the same position. They're all 3 technique guys: DeForest Buckner, Eric Armstead. Solomon Thomas, I think, is best in that spot as well inside. With the exception of those linebackers in Reuben Foster and Fred Warner that they've acquired, really all of the talent is just focused in that one particular spot. There's no edge rush to speak of still, and that's still one of the most important ways of screwing up a team when you know that they're passing late in the game and they're trying to come back, is you need guys that can come off the edge and pressure the quarterback, and the 49ers don't have that yet. And the secondary, I think, is still a bit of a question mark, but with the exception of Richard Sherman, it's very young. There's a lot of young players there that haven't quite hit their stride, and we don't know quite what they're going to become. I think Sherman has actually played pretty well and has very rarely been targeted this season. So all of the targets are heading in the direction of those young players. I think this entire team looks different with Jimmy Garoppolo out there at quarterback. And the second you remove a quarterback from any team, they're going to look completely different. You think back to Green Bay without Aaron Rodgers. So it's just, I don't think it's fair to judge this coaching staff based on the performance of what's happening right now. You give them an off season, you add some more talent to both sides of the ball, and you see what things look like next year. But right now, I don't think there's anything you can see on the field to suggest that anybody should be losing their job over this.
Sam, great stuff as ever. Thanks a million for joining us this week.
Anytime, thanks.
It's Sam Monson there. You can get him at PFF_Sam for all his goodness. Now, the picks this week. I'm going to try and win you some money, right, Sue? How'd you get on last week?
Well, you see, that's where I went wrong because the 2 weeks before where everything came through.
No, that's not that.
No, wait.
What's the answer? How'd you
No,
know?
wait.
I
made the bet myself.
Oh, that's
where
right.
yeah.
Yes, put money on.
So I was like, that's exactly where I went wrong. Yeah, I didn't beat the spread. No, they were huge spreads. Didn't beat the spread in the Chiefs or the Rams.
So we, just to recap, we made 3 picks the first week.
Yes.
How many?
1.
3, all 3 were correct?
No, 1 out of 3.
1 out of 3 were correct.
Yes.
Second week, we made 5 picks. 3. We made 3 picks public. Okay, all 3. So we were 4 out of 6, which is a winning record. Mm-hmm. It's not bad.
Yeah.
And then last week we got 1 out of 3.
No, last week, no, because then there was the 4 out of 4.
Oh, there was a 4 out of 4?
4 out of 4, yeah.
In between. All right, so we were at 8 out of 10.
Yeah.
Well, 8 out of 10 is profit all the way. So
that's not a bet.
How did we get on last week?
So I just tweeted them, and it was the Rams.
You had 5 picks, but 3 proper ones.
Yeah, 3 proper ones. Rams were -10 to beat the spread at home against Seahawks. The Chiefs were -16.5. Can't even remember who they were playing. And the Chargers at the Raiders.
Yeah, the Chargers and the Raiders was a great pick. Everybody should have piled onto that because the Raiders are the worst team in the history of football.
Beat them by that much in the end, though. It was 20-7 or something. I was a bit kind of.
They were grand.
The spreads are way too big. I shouldn't have gone with it, and I should have trusted the Saints. What was I thinking?
Yeah, I don't think the spreads were too big for a load of games. That's the thing. It's like there are a lot of really bad teams at the moment, and there are some teams that are being underrated. So the Seahawks.
Yeah.
I was like, I don't know. There's loads of times in that division where a team is really crap and they end up playing okay, and only losing by a score.
And Russell Wilson is he drags them through it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I just thought the Rams were so high scoring up to that point and had been absolutely amazing in offense. There was
Do you
no
watch
way.
NFL Game Day, the half-hour highlight show? Mm-hmm. It's the mix of their mic'd up stuff and...
yeah.
The previous week, Russell Wilson had dragged them back. I mean, I think he has Tourette's because he's just kind of constantly talking and saying the same thing and no one's paying any attention to him. And it looks really, really like... That guy, he's in a zone where I'm not really sure that it's a normal zone.
Yeah.
But
he's amazing. There was one game last season that he basically won the whole game by himself. Can't remember what it was. Yeah, well, let's not go that far. But he threw so many amazing catches. Like, it was unreal. I think he's a great quarterback. I actually really like watching him.
Amazing to watch.
Yeah.
But, nearly dragged them back the previous week as well. There was like a 4th down play, last second, ball gets tipped through.
Yeah.
And in fairness to him, we did go over and console the player who dropped it. Yeah. But so this week, I'm just actually trying to find spreads.
Sorry, the Patriots fell apart last week as well. Like, who was going to predict how bad Tom Brady were going to be? Anyway.
Well, the bit where they throw the ball to him and he stumbles because it's like, I
love that they did the play though afterwards. I'm like, this is how you do it.
There's a 5th step, Tom. What? I have to run
so
another step?
Yeah. Anyway, made him look his age. So it's a really weird week. I'm going to go with the Panthers at the Lions -3.5. The Lions kind of fell apart last week.
So did the Panthers.
Yeah, but I would trust them to win that game. So they're on the road. I'm going to pick the Steelers as well on the road, -5 of the Jags. So the Colts pushed for me last week at -3.
Yeah.
And they were at home. I'm not going to go near the Colts because I think the Titans are pretty good. I'm also kind of worried about the Broncos and the Chargers because I think Broncos are really unpredictable. But I'm going to go with the Saints, -7.5 at home.
Saints are playing
the Eagles. And I know the Eagles have gotten progressively better across the year, but I think the Saints offense...
-7.5.
Mm-hmm. At home.
Okay.
I have a feeling about it. I didn't trust them last week. And I thought it was going to be a tough contest against the Bengals, and it wasn't at all. And I think they're going to be really good against the Eagles. I think they're going to have a point to prove about last year.
I think the Saints spread is moving. I'm just trying to look.
Is it?
There. Yeah.
I printed them about an hour ago. Okay. So it shouldn't have moved that much. The other one I was looking at was the Bucks at the Giants, but then again, those are wildly unpredictable, and I wouldn't go near the Vikings or the Bears or the Chiefs and the Rams.
Very hard to know what to do, isn't it?
It's a very weird week. And there's a lot of kind of not great teams playing each other. Raiders and Cardinals as well, like Texans and Redskins. I just don't know who you're picking those. So I'm going to go with Panthers, Steelers and Saints.
So the Panthers -3.5.
Yes.
In Detroit.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The Saints -7.5 at home against Philly.
Yeah, and Steelers at Jacksonville.
Steelers at Jacksonville.
Mm-hmm.
Getting points or
-5.
giving -5?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's interesting. Jacksonville obviously beat them twice last season.
Mm-hmm.
All right, giving points on the road. Fastest way to the poorhouse, everybody.
Yeah, and like last week I did the big spreads and I lost. So like, let's just see how this goes.
All right, well, best of luck with Sue's bets this week. No, seriously, best of luck, because we could do with a winning week.
Hey.
That's pretty much all we've got time for on the show this week. If you want to get in touch with us, you can hit us up on Twitter, or you can leave a comment on the Facebook or YouTube or Periscope stream. Thanks very much. We'll be back next week. Enjoy the football.